of my favorite things about these long summer days is the simplicity of the humble days. There's not a lot going on, and the days just stretch while I putter around the house and the farm. Simple meals like breakfast for supper, organizing the farmhouse, adding seasonal beauty, and tending to the garden and critters makes for a small, humble little life. We are working on a lot of big swaps around our house. The baby is moving out of our room and into a room with his sister. I'm working to share that with y'all soon, but this has somehow opened up the house for a total reorganization. The house feels lighter and simpler and more in line with the season of life that we are currently in. I actually find that this happens often, especially with young children, because the needs of those children change so quickly as they grow. What worked well for us even a month ago is so much different than what we need now as the baby nears a year old. Can you believe it? Jack Riley is almost 1. By moving him and all of his belongings, the wall and the hutch in our room is now freed up to move all of my sewing and camera items in. I have a desk that I work at for the sewing shop, or even a simple afternoon of sewing my own projects and working on the blog and my videos here. It is so refreshing to have a designated area to work, and we have reclaimed our dining room for actual eating as a family rather than for working. The hutch used to house all of the baby's clothes that were too big or too small, but now it is the perfect space to hold all of my fabric and sewing tools. I even have space to store our finished aprons for our shop. Since this is a small shop ran by my mom and I, we only have 2 aprons right now that are not custom orders. This yellow plaid apron feels very old-fashioned, yet perfect for the modern homemaker. The floral waste apron is one of our gardening aprons, and it actually ties up so that you have a deeper pocket for harvesting from the garden or picking up toys around the house from the kids. As it usually goes, reorganizing one area leads to another and another and another. This opened up a cabinet in our entryway that used to be my craft cabinet. It's now the utility or mudroom cabinet. It holds some small tools that I use to hang up frames or plates for the wall, batteries, light bulbs, all of those types of things. In the top, I've moved all of the seasonal outdoor supplies. It has garden supplies right now since it's summer. On the other side, it has a mail basket where I can drop mail or things that I need to work on, a calendar, other things like this. I also moved my soap supplies into the kitchen, which is closer to where I actually make the soap and my other skincare items. It also gives me more room to store my oils, powders, and fragrances. With moving the garden supplies into the entryway cabinet, I wanted to swap out the quilts that I had on top for a basket of dried flowers. I think they look perfect next to my antique oil lamps that were my grandma's. It also gave my aprons a new home off of the pantry door where they were constantly in the way onto the peg rack in the dining room that the flowers were hanging on originally. Wicker chest that has been in the dining room that holds all of our coats. Eventually, those coats may go into the top of our closets, but for now, they're organized, and even though we don't use them right now in the middle of summer, I don't really have a need better suited for that space. Above that, though, I hung my favorite hat for grabbing before running out to the garden. This house swapping made homes for things that otherwise were just kind of sitting around, cluttering the surfaces, and made other rooms in the home more functional for what we actually need to use them for, all by starting in just one area and shifting things around. And the best part is, we didn't even buy anything. I find that some of my best home decorating and organizing comes from shopping the home or even just adjusting rooms in new ways to fit the season of life that we're in. So now we have several spaces and rooms that are functionally just better, but they also freshened up some decor to bring a little seasonal beauty into our little farmhouse here. I was always in the kitchen as a kid, and I try to be intentional with my own children on this as well. I've said this on here before. Plus, it's just fun. I have been getting Isla in here with me for a lot of meals, but specifically when I'm making our weekly bread or treats or something fun, she loves it. And honestly, she can almost get the bread mixed up by herself. Math skills, fine motor skills, problem solving, and patience are all being learned here. And she gets the fun of an activity with Mama, and then we have bread by the end of the day. We want to try our hand at sandwich bread for subs rather than a traditional loaf. Pretty much any time I am baking bread, it comes from the same recipe. I just tweak it. Today I decided to swap the milk that I usually use for just water and the butter for olive oil, but otherwise kept my usual recipe. We made 2 loaves, but this will actually make 4-foot-long loaves better than just the 2. They were a little big, Here is the recipe we like. 3/4 cup of water, 1/4 cup of oil, an egg, 2 tablespoons of sugar or even honey, 2 1/4 teaspoons of yeast, 2 to 3 cups of flour, and 3/4 teaspoon of salt. I always add my liquids first, so I add my water, oil, an egg, and the sugar to a stand mixer with the hook attachment, and mix that up on low. Then add my yeast, my flour, and my salt, being sure to add the salt last. I knead it for 5 to 10 minutes until the top of the dough starts to pull away from the sides of the bowl. It should be slightly sticky, and then you want it to pass the window pane test. The window pane test just means that when you stretch a little piece of the dough, it'll stretch very thin and almost become see-through. Allow the dough to rest covered in a warm spot until doubled, and then once it's doubled, punch down the dough and knead it by hand for a few minutes. Then we're going to shape the dough by cutting it into 4, not 2, but 4 equal pieces, and stretch it into long rectangles slightly longer than a foot. Roll the dough tightly into a log by rolling it with your hands, and then tuck the ends under on each side, and place that shaped dough onto pieces of parchment paper where they are separated from each other to help hold their shape, or you can use a several mat to help shape the loaves. Allow them to rise again to double, and if you want to add toppings like cheese or herbs, butter the top and then sprinkle it on before you bake. Then bake at 350 until golden brown. And I always butter the tops of the bread immediately after baking, and that keeps it nice and soft. The recipe was just right for these, but we're going to keep practicing to get the size and the shape right. The size, we needed to double how many loaves we actually made out of this, and then the shape I think will come from just getting the right pan. But these are perfect for a snack board, or in this case we had a sandwich board for lunch. I love to take a wood cutting board and layer on the cheese, deli meats, vegetables, pickles, and other sandwich or snack fixins for a quick cold lunch on these hot summer days. Now, it is that time of year where the garden is big enough to attract pests. Last year, I learned about this homemade spray that, when used consistently, helped with the pests on our pumpkins, our cabbage, our squash, and our tomatoes. Some people do not like the use of any sprays, natural or not, but we like to balance a homemade spray with regular manual pest control, like just picking them off. Last year, I used a regular spray bottle. This year, with the larger garden, I opted for a pressurized larger bottle. So here is what we do. Add a tablespoon of dish or Castile soap to a quart of water. And you can add in peppermint essential oil if you want, or even a peppermint infused oil. It's totally optional, but it repels pests even more. Mix them all up in the bottle and then spray it liberally on all parts of the leaves, front and back, but only in the cooler times of day with shade. We prefer in the evenings. We use it weekly to every few days. You can even do it daily. You remove any pests or eggs if you see them, and then spray it, and slowly over time, the number of pests and eggs that you find will diminish. I love hummingbirds as many do, and I have memories as a kid of my grandma and my mom keeping feeders out and always having hummingbirds flying around. Now every year I get excited to get the feeders out when spring rolls around. I refill my feeders about once a week using a homemade Hummingbird feed that is cheap and easy to make. So here is how I make it. It is just 2 cups of water and a half cup of sugar. Very easy. You heat the water and the sugar on the stove until they're dissolved, and then let them cool and add them to your feeders. Simple, but it brings so much joy to our porch this summer. I have 2 new feeders that were gifted to me this year on the front porch, and I love that the feed is clear rather than the red store-bought version. Simple summer days call for humble suppers. My fallback is breakfast at least once a week. Now this changes up as far as what types of breakfast I make, but this is just an overall staple. Today we were in the mood for buttermilk biscuits and gravy, eggs, bacon, and strawberry jelly. Growing up, my mom always made a white pepper gravy. Occasionally she'd make sausage gravy, which we also love, but more often than not it was pepper gravy. I also make my biscuits with whatever we have on hand. So sometimes this is butter, sometimes lard. Today I wanted to use up the rest of the Crisco can so I could get it out of the pantry. I also do this with milk. Sometimes I have store buttermilk on hand, but we also have our own milk goats. So many times I am using just plain goat's milk or home fermented buttermilk, which is my favorite. Here are my recipes for the biscuits and gravy. The buttermilk biscuits are half a cup of lard or butter or Crisco, whatever grease you're going to use, a cup of buttermilk, and 2 cups of self-rising flour. If you don't have self-rising, you can just do 2 cups of flour, a teaspoon and a half of baking powder, and a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. Grease your biscuit pan and preheat your oven to 500 degrees. And then in a large bowl, you add your grease and your buttermilk and use your fingers to break up the grease in the milk. Slowly add in your flour, and then you mix before you continue to add. You don't want to overmix, but you also do want to add the flour in small amounts to get a very smooth dough. Dump your dough onto a floured surface, flour the top, and then pat it out. Now we're going to fold the dough over itself and pat it out again. I do this 2 to 3 times. Then pat it out one last time to about 1/2 inch thick and use a biscuit cutter or a jelly jar to cut out the biscuits and place them closely together on your pan. I like to squeeze them in tightly to help them rise where they can't go anywhere else but up. Bake until golden brown on top. Then for the white pepper gravy, it is just butter, plain flour, milk, and salt and pepper. For every cup of gravy I want, though, I add about a tablespoon of butter to a saucepan and melt it over medium heat. Then add the same amount of flour as butter and whisk to combine it. It'll be a thick paste, and then I allow that to cook for a few minutes without burning, so you have to stir it. Then add 1 cup of milk per tablespoon of butter, and whisk constantly over the heat until thickened. Add your salt and pepper to taste. Everything is 1 for 1 for 1, so it's a tablespoon of butter to a tablespoon of flour to a cup of milk. You need to get out of the kitchen real quick because Mama's making out this pot. Yes, please. But that's like her joke thing. All of the recipes or projects that I have shared here are going to be linked in the description below with a printable version that you can go grab if you are wanting to get that printed off or have easier access rather than just listen to me say it. I'm so glad to have you visiting here on our little country farm. Thanks for stopping by, and I'll see you again next week.